Welcome to the CMO Spotlight. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with DeLu Jackson, who is the EVP and Chief Marketing Officer of ADT. Welcome, DeLu.
Great to be here and really excited about the conversation.
I am too. So, DeLu, I wonder if you could first tell us a little bit more about ADT as a company, because I know it's a pretty ubiquitous company that many of us have heard of, and many like me are actual customers. But if you could tell us more about the size and scope and what ADT does.
Sure. Yeah, I'm excited to share. This is company this year will be 150 years old in August of this year, and been providing security solutions for that entire time. We're, as you said, best known for our residential security. We also do small business security and a number of security solutions in health, multifamily. And so our portfolio has expanded beyond what we traditionally were known as professionally installed home security. We even have a self-setup product now. So the business and the portfolio have expanded substantially over its history.
Very cool. So I'm curious to hear more about your role as Chief Marketing Officer. Maybe tell a little bit about what your team looks like and what are some of the functions that you oversee.
Sure. And it's a little beyond what probably would be known as Chief Marketing Officer. So in the marketing function, I have advanced analytics, machine learning, consumer insights, media, creative and content, e-commerce, and then something called performance analytics, where we do the measurement and performance measurement for all of the business, because we're a big lead gen and lead generation operation. In addition to that, we have an inside sales group, so about 900 phone sales advisors that also reports to me. And then and PR and corporate communications also sit with me. And that includes ESG, our philanthropy work, as well as our internal and external comms.
That's interesting because a lot of times communications sits outside of a marketing function. To your point, that you have some responsibility beyond just the traditional marketing functions.
Right. And it's really great because the connection with sales is also something that typically is separate. And in lead gen businesses, that can often be, information flow can be a challenge. So having those teams work very closely together on so much of the experience and engagement for the customers is really beneficial, we think, from an overall customer experience perspective.
Absolutely. Well, so I think you said you grew up in Dallas, Texas, and then headed off to Princeton in New Jersey for undergrad. And then you ended up a couple of years later, I think 5 years later, getting an MBA from NYU Stern School of Business.
Right.
But I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your career path, your career journey. I know you began at the very beginning at an agency for a couple of years, did a stint at Ford, and then ended up working for several automotive manufacturers before you ended up in some other businesses. So I wonder if you could just give us a little quick synopsis of that path.
Sure. And just right before my consulting experience with Profit, the brand strategy company, I worked in sales and marketing. My first role was sales and marketing with a company is now part of Diageo. And then doing the consulting with Profit and really started my accelerated marketing and I say CMO path, learning from some very great leaders there about brand strategy, the power of brand, and how it drives business. Went through my graduate school work at NYU while working there at Profit as a consultant. And then post that, I worked in automotive. I was part of a marketing leadership program at some great brands, Ford, and then went on to Subaru, and then Audi, and then Nissan. And that path was really a transformation path. This sort of digital became this transformational force in all business, right, through the late 90s, early 2000s. And these great iconic businesses and brands were trying to identify how I'm going to operate in this new ecosystem. And really new world order is what it was, right? So I remember launching some innovations at some of those brands around things that we take for granted today, like iPads, Remember those
Yeah,
became
right.
an everyday use item, and we were working on how they would operate in the showroom, or how we could distribute content faster, or how consumers would consume that information faster. Like all of that was happening in that, so we were really thinking about, in a world gone digital, how do businesses that have been largely analog continue to lead the charge?
That's cool.
Yeah, and from there, a lot of that transformational work, which was really ahead of the curve, was recognized by other industries that needed the same thing. So I got a call from McDonald's, to work on digital transformation work there. Again, another great iconic business where the definition of convenience was being transformed by digital technologies, right down to how you paid, right? With Apple Pay and Google Pay and all these new payment structures, and how do you work that into a system that's largely been cash, right? So all of these dynamics were part of these, not just digital transformations, but market and consumer transformation, and all these companies associated with. And so that's sort of been my career arc, is just being the role of a transformer, and thinking about how these great brands, really goes back to my brand strategy work, is how a brand participates in these new consumer circumstances. And each of these brands or businesses recognize their leadership, and continued leadership would be based on how they continue to evolve in those environments.
Awesome.
So I
And
was
so I know,
fortunate to be a part of a lot of those
and
opportunities.
so I know you went from McDonald's to a short time at Kellogg and then ConAgra after that. And then you made the transition from ConAgra to ADT. So talk about, how was that transition going from automotive for a big chunk of your career? And to your point, you were talking, you were a change agent. So it wasn't about just automotive marketing. It was about, how do we transform digitally, for example. But talk about that transition from that to, to ConAgra to ADT, in the security business. You've worked across a number of different verticals now in your career.
Right. Yeah, from consulting to financial services to automotive to, well,
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, one, I'll draw back on my consulting experiences. We looked at lots of different businesses, and across our experience. But what was unique and I think neat about all of them, it's the same consumers or the same households. When we as marketers think about that, there are a finite number of households and consumers of any, not single product, but number of products. That's the interesting part for me. So when I went from automotive to QSR restaurants, someone asked me the same question. I said, it's the same consumers. We put big cup holders in those cars because they bought big cups at McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
Or, so it was really, those are the things. And when we were doing consumer insights and research, we studied not what they did with the car, but everything they did outside the car to determine what we put into it. And I think that's true about any demand-based marketers and understanding of those consumer jobs or struggles. And so you could start to think that every consumer or household has a basket of goods, services, and brands that go into that. I mean, we all see it. I can see it in your background, all the different brands you interact with.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that was the insight for me as a marketer, is that they were all the same consumers. And as I've always tried to focus on the consumers or the households or the end users or consumers of a thing. And that's allowed those transitions to be more additive rather than disruptive. Does that make sense? Oh,
Yeah.
we're going to add this to the basket of goods. Oh, similar households. Oh, similar structure, right? Same demographics. They live in the same areas. They have the same incomes, and they consume and buy certain things. Let's see where we fit in that basket of goods. So
That's really cool. I think that's a great way to think about it. It's like, you think about, they're consuming financial goods, they're driving around in their car, they're stopping to get something to eat, something to drink, they're getting snacks or things from ConAgra. They come home to their house and they've got security there. They work in a small business that also has security there. Like, you're involved in just different aspects of the consumer's daily routine, essentially, and daily life.
All right. And that tells us what they need to protect or connect. That's what you said. So all the things you just described, then say, well, what is the universe that matters to those consumers? And so as we think about advising on connection and protection, which is what we do, we have an understanding of what matters to those consumers. So
Absolutely. Now, my question is, did you move for each one of those gigs? Because you worked at some really iconic companies and they're all headquartered in different parts of the country. So did you have to move each time or did you end up staying in the same place for some of them?
I did. Each one was a relocation, and my wonderful family and has been great supporters of me on that. Probably the biggest move was when working for Nissan. We moved to Tokyo.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Spent four
wow.
years there, and that was, I think, also a transformational experience for me as a leader, because you realize we've left our comfort zone.
Yeah.
Go as a leader of a large team and a global team and don't speak the language.
Yeah.
And
But in 4 years, did you learn or did your family learn to speak
we learned
some
enough to
Japanese?
operate.
Yeah.
We could get around in the neighborhood, but people were very accommodating and very
Hmm.
supportive. And it was really, again, this testament of, I had a great boss who said, you'll learn humility like you've never had as a leader
Right.
when you're the outsider.
Hmm.
Right. And now, so it was really about the effort and learning from the teams and really how much they taught me about how to operate and lead in that environment versus me coming in saying you have to do it a certain way. It was really about understanding how to operate in an environment that was new to me. And it taught me a lot about how to engage people and the different ways of communicating from verbal to, physical in person. So it was really great for me as a leader.
Yeah. And then we had to learn a new paradigm of communication when COVID hit, when we all were in little boxes like this. A whole other story. So I'm curious if there's a piece of advice that either you wish you'd gotten early in your career, or maybe you would dispense to a young person who's just starting out in a marketing career.
Yeah, I would say that I learned this, and this was a combination of working globally where I had to do a lot of this remote anyway, because I had
Yeah,
people
right.
all over the world. So we started to prepare for it. But understanding the different types of communicators, right? So we tend to think like, well, I communicate like this, so everyone has to adapt.
Mm,
But as I was going through my leadership journey, particularly when I got global and realized that I really was the one that had to adapt, so that
mhm.
I had to understand my team and my peers and my partners as much as I expected them to understand me. And then that lesson was summarized for me when, and I can't remember if it was a TED talk or something else. Someone said, "What if we spend as much time understanding our teams and our people as we do understanding consumers?"
Mm.
And that as a marketer meant a ton to me because I understood how each of my leaders or my team members could be most effective, and understanding them as almost as end users was really important.
That's cool. Well, I think if you treat your team as your most valued constituent group, then they will in turn do the best work and treat the customer, the consumer, the best. So I think that's a smart approach.
And they taught me a ton. I have to
Hmm.
tell you how much I learned as I stepped into new organizations or new environments by engaging them in that manner.
100%. Well, so I'm curious. I think everybody has a superpower. So I'm curious what your superpower is, DeLu.
Well, I think that it's connecting dots. And I'd say that in that obviously we deal with lots of information, with lots of components of our jobs. And it's the ability to process that quickly and understand the interrelated nature of those different things, because there's so many puts and takes. And I've found that, and I think it was back to my consulting days, learn
Yeah.
very quickly how to process lots of information, put it together, and make sense of it, and then communicate that back out to have impact to my businesses.
So I'm curious if there are some specific values that you either want to demonstrate to your team, or maybe you would demand of somebody that would become part of your team.
Yeah, probably the biggest one for me is the true nature of uh, collaboration and team, I call this peer elevation or
Mm,
peer
hmm.
support, that often in high performing teams, people look for their leaders to say, what should I do next? Or what happens when I interact with this person? Or, hey, I'm having a challenge here. And I think the peers can be a really big resource for that. And I think that that's really important for me, is that they're working together to help each other make progress quickly, particularly as they go up in level. That's more and more important.
Yeah, and I think particularly because you've worked in fairly, well, not fairly, very large companies with lots of people and lots of teams and teams that have to collaborate with other teams and interact with other teams. So I think that's a great, piece of advice, and also looking for people that are team players that collaborate well with others, play nicely with others.
It's really important.
Yeah. So at Setup here, we're marketing matchmakers, and we connect marketing agencies and brands together, brands and marketing agencies together, often to help the brand fill some gaps, and usually either a capacity gap, like we don't have enough arms and legs to do the marketing activity, or a capability gap, we're just not good at one or two disciplines of marketing. But we don't live, we're not a client, and we're not on the agency side, we're live somewhere in between. So we think a lot about that relationship between brands and agencies. And so I'm curious, just what's your philosophy on marketing agencies? How do you work with marketing agencies at ADT, or maybe in a previous life?
Yeah, I think one is they're just really important partners in different contexts. And I've worked in organizations that have insourced some, and some that are outsourced, and some that had hybrids. But in my career, I've always had some relationship with agencies at some level, period. The thing that I found most important is to really treat the key members of those teams as if they're my team. Many of the leaders even functioning and operating as part of my direct leadership and reporting structure, so that people see them as an integral part of the operation, whether it's big or small in terms of total scope. And I just think that has worked well for me in the ability to move at pace, create great, not just insights and trust, but the more direct interaction with the teams has also allowed the teams to benefit from working with each other closely. So there's no, hey, we'll come up with everything and hand it off. It's, hey, we build it together. And there's this co-ownership, co-leadership, co-advancement as the teams work together.
I recently wrote a blog post about the transition that often people make in their marketing careers between, I'm on the client side, I'm on the agency side, and back and forth, and the differences. So here's a curveball question for you: is what's a thing that you wish that agencies knew about working with clients that you don't feel they always know so well?
Yeah, it would be, it probably would follow on to that one, is that you can be as involved as you're willing to be involved. Right. I think there's this idea that there's a internal view of things and an external view of things. And of course, there's always information that can't be shared with external partners. But we tend to have these great, long-lasting relationships. And where I've seen them the best is that line gets pretty blurred.
Yeah, right.
And I would encourage any of those new relationships maybe to ask. and there's probably a lot more that can be shared than immediately understood.
Well, I do think that some clients are more predisposed and prone to letting their agencies into the kimono, so to speak, and see, the inner workings. And then there's some that like to keep an agency a little bit at arm's length, and hey, you're and it sounds like you're more in that first camp of, hey, I'm going to share as much as I possibly can with my agencies because they're truly a partner and part of the team.
That is just, again, that is my experience that has been beneficial to me. And I would say this is something I would share, is that we have so much to teach each other. And I think that's probably part of the humility of learning over time, is that, it's sort of like, well, I'm the client, so I know more, and they're the agency, they know this. And it's like, well, actually, we just know different stuff.
Yeah,
and so
right.
if we would actually combine the different stuff we know, imagine what that can create.
So speaking of that, are there certain disciplines of marketing or functions that you feel, man, we need to own this in-house, it's really important and core to our business? Or, you know what, we really need to get it outside perspective, outside experience, outside skills. Are there certain disciplines that you feel like, mostly you want to keep inside versus is get out external perspective?
Um, Actually, the simple answer to that is it depends.
Mm,
And I think it comes back to the core competencies and, to your point, the cores of the business. And even in that, the last thing I would say, even if that was the desire, do we have enough of the right talent to manage that at scale and create the continuity for the business that we need
mhm, mhm.
independently of partners? And I just look at the evidence and say it's not very often that most organizations have those capabilities and access to that to keep them 100% independent.
Right.
So we have some level of supplementation or partnership always. And it's, to me,
Yeah.
just a matter of depth and breadth of what that looks like.
Mm.
So yeah.
One of the services that we offer, we call marketing ecosystem consulting. And it's because the perfect nirvana ecosystem of internal resources and external partners, it looks totally different for every company and every organization. If you've got a great team that knows and lives and breathes performance marketing, you may not need as much of that from an agency. If you don't have that, you might need that from external. And so that kind of work that we're doing in that area has been really interesting to see. There's no specific template that you could just walk in and say, here's what you should be doing. You have to learn about the organization and interview all the team stakeholders, internal and external, and make a plan for what that right ecosystem is. And I'm sure for you, even as you've had different stops along your career journey, that balance and mix looks probably totally different for each organization you've been in.
Absolutely. Everything you said is exactly right. It's been different for each one. And then again, sometimes it's resource availability, like geography matters, right?
Yeah.
Talent pools and talent availability. Obviously, as we've been remote, some of those things have been a little bit more available to us. But even that, just again, there's so many organizations that are going after a lot of the talent out there that getting them all in one place is just sometimes difficult because there's
Yeah.
demand. So all of that, you said, is really important. And then last thing I would say is succession planning.
Mm,
You realize when like people with superpowers move on, even with a
right.
good succession plan,
Right.
it's different when those transitions happen. And as I've moved across organizations and had changes inside my organizations, we realize the differences when the organizational structure or the people change.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great to think about that because and some of us are able to bring people with us along the way, like, hey, we worked with you at one stop and you were so good, I want to bring you to the next stop too if we can, and sometimes
Yeah.
that works.
Yeah.
So as marketers, often we're dealing with and working with non-marketing functions of the organization that sometimes think they're all marketers but not aren't professional marketers. So I'm curious, how do you demonstrate marketing, the value of marketing to the non-marketing functions within the organization?
Sure. I think it's learning to speak the language of the business. And,
Hmm.
I've heard lots of people say that or use that term. But if the focus is financial, then really good with the financials.
Yeah.
Focus is product, get really good with the product language. If the language is technology, get really good with the technology language. Right. And I think that's been the difference is, across marketers is I hear this sometimes, marketers have their own KPIs and they have their own metrics, all this.
Vanity metrics,
Yeah.
sometimes they say. Yeah.
Our team measures to financial metrics and
Hmm.
actually even works across the organization. We're at the center of providing those metrics and that analytics. I would say in our business, which is great, it's not even the marketing investment impact down to the sale, but to the actual installation, right? Which
Hmm.
I think is fairly unique and really strong in the performance marketing, performance measurement area. Requires good data, but it also requires strong people that understand the language of the business. And
Hmm.
that's a great benefit when we can have a conversation equally with finance and sales and with product, and we're on a common foundation of information. It allows us to make decisions with confidence and quickly.
Hmm. Well, I think that's when you can, for your example, get all the way down to the appointment and to the metric, to the installation, and then the, churn and the keeping the customer for long term. That's a little easier to demonstrate. It's a little harder when you're talking about big fluffy things like brand attributes and things like that. So, does that change if you're trying to demonstrate the value of something that's more nebulous than a specific lead and a specific install?
It can be, right? So, because if you get really happy with all those other ones that are super attributable, the less attributable ones, sometimes if you can't measure it, it starts to say, well, if I can't measure it, does it mean it's less valuable? And I've always learned that it's just different measures, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, it's a level of comfort with, if you're really good with the others, how comfortable are you with some portion of it being a little less attributable? And I'll tell you one lesson I've learned is if you do the mix over time, you actually can start to see how those discrete variables impact the very measurable components, right? Versus trying to do single
Yeah.
line attribution, but doing them over time, you start to understand the collective impact of them.
You just gave me a flashback to some years ago. I was pitching in Hershey, Pennsylvania, to a big company based there, and they told me that this digital stuff's not measurable like the traditional advertising. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, but digital's super measurable. And what they were saying was, we've had 60 years to come up with a media mix model to know the impact of running additional TV spots in a specific market. Whereas at the time, digital was pretty fresh and new, and it was hard to measure. You couldn't use a coupon on a $1.50 candy bar to see if your digital thing was working or not. And I think, to your point, you can measure brand attributes in other ways that are still have an impact in the long term on the performance and on the performance marketing.
And I think that's what's great when you connect those. They become, again, more credible and more tangible. And I say what you just described is they become familiar. And once they're familiar, they're part of our conversation in the business language.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. So last marketing related question, and then we have some fun ones just to wrap things up. So I'm curious if there's a campaign or a program that you either at ADT or even in a previous life that taught you something really valuable, either because it was a flop and you learned something you needed to learn, or it was a huge success and it was something that you maybe would like to repeat again if you could.
Yeah, I would say that I would go back to the success that one of my favorite auto brands have. Again, I loved all my auto companies and careers. But at Audi, when they were going through a transformation, a sort of reimagining the brand, I thought the campaigns that they ran were really unique. And I'll tell you a few of them. I started with Super Bowl launch, and I think it was the R8, and they used a throwback to maybe it was the Godfather original, if you remember. And they were talking about old luxury and this transformation to new luxury. And I think, you open on the scene in the house and they pull back the cover and it's the grill of an old luxury car.
Right, not a horse's head, but
you remember that one? Really
yes.
neat. But if you follow that campaign trajectory, what I thought was so clever, it was this insight about the consumers really trying to reimagine what that space looked like, and having had the same solutions, which are great solutions, that there was a space for a challenger or a new entrant, and who's willing to play that. And I just thought, if you follow the campaign that happened over those years and the continuation of that theme, I just thought it was just great around consumer insight, really clever work, and just engaging, like really neat, fun ways to communicate brand, product, and transformation all in one. So just neat work. And again, across all my different companies, they've done clever and amazing stuff. But that one just really stood out for me. And it was really probably why it stuck with me. It was a transformation of me from doing just digital marketing to transforming into the broader marketing landscape. So really learned a ton in terms of my next few steps in my career. So really kudos to that team and the partnerships they had there. And I think teaching some really great marketing insights.
It's always fun when you can point to a Super Bowl campaign as like an example that that worked well. Because we know that there's a lot on the line and in terms of money and time and effort that goes into those, and you hope that they'll pay off. And it sounds like that was a really successful campaign for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
Okay, let's finish with a couple of fun questions that aren't necessarily specific to marketing. The first is there a movie or a book or a quote or a band or a sports team that really inspires you? And what is it about that thing that inspires you most?
Yeah. There's this great quote from a movie, I think it was Pulp Fiction,
Hmm.
and it says, if my answers frighten you, you should cease asking scary questions. And I
I
always
love that.
love that quote because go back to my career, sort of this transformer, as I'm walking through all these different organizations and circumstances, those are always what we got, right? We got the tough
Yeah.
questions. And we always had the balance of, right, do we frighten them with the answers? Or you talked about digital, you're transforming into digital and you want to explain it. And I think it was, we always got those big, tough questions. And then we always had to say, but we have to make sure that our audience understands it, feels comfortable with it, can go on that journey. So that one's
Hmm.
always stuck for me, is like, how do I balance that? So it's
That's
just,
awesome.
yeah,
Well, and if you ask only mild questions, you're only going to get mild answers.
that's right. That's right. Always love
Um,
that.
so I'm curious, other than your family, because that's an easy call answer. Where do you find joy outside of work? Do you have some hobbies or things that you enjoy?
Yeah, probably most people would find me on a golf course if the weather permitting. And it
And
does
you live
tie
in Florida.
my,
You live in Florida now, so you have opportunities to play quite a bit, I'm guessing.
it's a good opportunity to play mostly year round in Florida.
Mhm.
And I actually tie it back to my family. I love it because it's a lifelong thing, and my kids play, and we get to spend time together, and
Mm.
we get to talk a lot. Also, it's a way for me to give back. I do a lot of work with uh, organizations that give back through the game, youth caddy programs and scholarship programs. And just it's a great way to connect people and get to know people. And and I do a lot there with charity work and with the game itself. So
Very cool. Well, as of this recording, the Masters just ended yesterday, so golf is on a lot of people's minds right now, particularly. I'm curious if there's a brand that you never worked on that you always admired, and what is it about that brand that you admire most?
um it's cliche, but I really like Apple.
Mm.
I'll tell you why is that I didn't work on it, but we got to work together on different things. And I think they just had some principles and philosophies that they not only use, but they share with partners that were always interesting and then stuck with me, from, digital development to technology to HDMI design and just human machine interface, all those different things. They just really, and you can see it all the way through to the consumer benefit from
Hmm.
how they thought about product and development. So that's always one that I admire.
Yeah, I mean, make it simple isn't always. It's complex to make it simple, and I think they've been really successful at taking super complex things and making it as simple as possible. Which, um, kudos to them. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, well, DeLu Jackson is the EVP and Chief Marketing Officer for ADT. I appreciate this time, DeLu. It was such a fun time to have this conversation with you.
So great to see you, and great to have time with you today.